Hi, I'm Luke Haverstick, one of the sales managers for Calix in Iowa. At Calix, we know the subscribers' needs are changing. There are people working from home, families with gamers, and businesses that want to differentiate themselves. Security and online safety are of utmost importance. We also know that there's new and emerging competition for you. Calix aims to simplify your operations, innovate for the subscribers of all types, and help you grow value for your business and the communities in which you reside. If you haven't already, starting tomorrow, please come see the Iowa Calix team at booth 308. Now please help me welcome Matt Behrens, Iowa's Chief Information Officer at the Department of Management Division of Information Technology, Christopher Hull, Iowa's Federal Program Officer from NTIA, and ICA CEO Dave Duncan.
Thank you for that introduction, and thanks to Calix for sponsoring this event. We are at the perfect time to have this conversation about BEAD or NOFA 9. There's been a lot of buildup. There's been a lot of groundwork made over the past year plus, and just a quick history for folks. We've had 8 NOFAs over the past 5 years or so, totaling over $501 million in state and federal funding, with over $500 million of private investment added on top of that. Now we're getting into the big one, BEAD, NOFA 9. Volume 1 and Volume 2 have been submitted by the state to the federal government for review and approval on how the state wants to run the program for BEAD. Back in December, ICA filed comments that pointed out several things that we liked about the program that the state was proposing, and we had some suggestions for changes as well. But the overriding principles of what ICA was talking about was, if you are going to have a massive investment in broadband throughout the state, we ICA members, collectively, we are the ones who want to help get all of Iowa connected. And we have demonstrated that we are the companies who are good and have a proven track record of serving rural Iowa. But the problem is, we've already had 9 rounds of broadband funding. We've had 8 rounds. This will be the 9th. And really, the only locations left are those that are hardest to serve. So therefore, in order for this program to work, this program must be user-friendly, low cost to administer, and as few external requirements as possible on it, so that we can give our providers the ability to make a long-term investment in serving these consumers. So one of the interesting things about the BEAD program is that the requirement in order for the state to even accept any money was that it's going to serve 100% of all the eligible unserved areas and locations that are identified. And that's quite a big undertaking. It's going to require a lot of coordination, both between the state and the federal folks, between the state and federal folks and all of us, and between providers as well. So it takes a lot of expertise, and that's who we have here today. So this is not, and I apologize to anybody who's coming here for a 101 type of class. As you can tell, I just jumped right into it because we've been talking broadband grants for a long time. So we're going to get into some hopefully some interesting and useful information for you all with the experts that we have. And they were already introduced, but Matt Behrens, clear over there. He is the State of Iowa Chief Information Officer. Christopher Hull, to my immediate left, the Federal Program Officer, Office of Internet Connectivity and Growth with NTIA. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave.
So let's just start with, Matt, can you give a brief introduction of what you do? And we all knew you as OCIO.
Right.
Now we call you Dom Do It. I'm not sure if that's the appropriate way, with Department of Management - Division of Information Technology.
Got it.
But I'm not sure that there's anyone here, first of all, who doesn't know who Matt Behrens is, or even his staff, because we have been involved in so many rounds of funding that there's been great lines of communication. But can you give us an overview of what it is that your department does, a little bit about your staff and their roles in administering the program?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And it's really great to see so many familiar faces out in the audience that we've had a chance to work with over the years. So our name has changed from the Office of the Chief Information Officer to the Department of Management Division of IT. But it's the same group of people doing the same things that you've worked with in the past. So we are the state's broadband office. We're the facilitator of the grant programs that flow through the state. And as Dave pointed out, we've been doing this a long time. Most of you are familiar with the NOFAs and the various maps that we've issued, both with state funding and with federal funding. My team is it's led by Jessica Turba. If you've had a chance to meet with Jessica in the past, she's the grants program administrator. And we have a few newer faces, especially in connection with the BEAD program. Jake Holmes is helping to lead up our BEAD administrative activities, and Deb Roeder on compliance. And we also have a couple of geospatial experts that you may work with sometimes. That's Patrick Wilkie-Brown and Joe Drehos. And so we work with a number of companies that help us, consultants that help us deliver the program. The one that you're probably most familiar with is FG, based out of Cedar Rapids, and Greg Labey is out here someplace. Greg, right there, stand up. If you have questions, Greg's your guy to see. He's the one who does a lot of the interaction with our grantees on a regular basis, and we also have Connected Nation, and they handle some of our mapping activities. So that's kind of an overview of the folks that are involved.
That's an impressive list. Just a quick show of hands. How many of you know by name some of the people that Matt just referenced? Because they are very responsive. Well, thanks for your but they're very responsive staff. We've had universally positive comments from our members in terms of ability to respond quickly with information that we ask. So we thank you for that. Christopher, now you have kind of an interesting and unique role as a representative of NTIA, kind of as the go-between between the Iowa program and the folks out at NTIA. So can you explain a little bit about what you do and how that interaction works?
Absolutely. I would echo Matt's thanks also. Thank you for hosting us and the invitation to join today. My role at NTIA is one that's specific to Iowa, and I really want to emphasize that. When Congress authorized the bipartisan infrastructure law and a number of these different programs, it was their intent to make sure that each state really had a unique approach, one that worked well for them, one that provided states the opportunity to take stock of their landscape, to assess perhaps how many rounds of grant funding they've previously authorized. They've gone through this exercise. They understand where some of these challenging spots that remain exist. And then to tailor their programs and try and figure out the best way to move forward to finally get to these hard-to-reach locations. So along with emphasizing the fact that I'm unique to Iowa, I'm here on the ground, I live in Sioux City, that's true of this national program. For each of the 56 states and territories, there's somebody like myself who's on the ground working in partnership with providers, with their state office, to make sure that if they have questions, if there's a unique approach that they may want to take, if there's an opportunity that fits their state better than it could fit Nebraska or South Dakota or Minnesota, that we know how to at least work with those questions and try to find a good answer for them. So it's really been a partnership between NTIA, Matt's office, a lot of communication with providers, and a lot of time out on the road, just making sure that as questions have come up, we do our best to provide customer service, to be responsive, and to work through the whole of the process. That's something that is unique to this program, and really, I think, a novel approach within federal grants. We know that this BEAD program is ambitious. It's a bit different than previous programs that have come through the state. It is proposing to tackle something that has not been done before. And historically, when you look at things like rural electrification, There are some regional needs or state-specific needs that are different here than they're going to be elsewhere. And I think that it's also a really, it's working thus far, and it's been a good approach for this program. We realize that there's a lot of communication that needs to continue. We've still got road ahead of us, but thus far I think it's been working well.
So this represents a significant opportunity, not only for the internet service providers in the room, but more importantly for the consumers of Iowa, to try to get people hooked up. For 15 years, our motto has been broadband for all Iowans. We have been on a mission to try to do that. So the process, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but the state has issued a proposal to NTIA saying this is how we would like the procedures to work out, and they're volume 1 and volume 2. And so NTIA, I believe, has to approve those both volumes before the state can start its challenge process on the map to identify which locations might be available. And I wanted to say, first of all, I think, and this, we wanted to say thanks to Matt, as part of the initial proposals, you also published a draft NOFA, which gave a lot of insight into what the program might look like. I'm not so sure that any other state did that. You did, and so thank you for that. But can you give us kind of a sense, whoever would like to tackle this one, where we are on the approval of volumes 1 and 2, and what that means to where we are in the program?
Volume 1 has been approved by NTIA, and for those like me who maybe don't follow what all these volumes necessarily do all the time, Volume 1 is about the map challenge process, and so that's approved and has been posted to our website. And just to confuse you a little more, our website is still ocio.iowa.gov/broad, because why would we want to make anything easy? So, but you can go out there and you can find Volume 1. Now, Volume 2 is still in curing with NTIA. And so if we get into, as we get into Volume 2 today, some of the comments that I'll make will be grounded in that version that we submitted to NTIA, because we don't know yet how some of those differences are going to be cured by NTIA and what the final outcome will actually be. So I'll have to beg your pardon. I'll have to be a little cautious today about making too many prospective comments about what will happen until we get to that point where we have a fully cured and published Volume 2.
And I'll add to that. So stepping back, and if you think about the program and planning process, what this really is an opportunity for states to kind of evaluate where they are. And we're very fortunate here in the state of Iowa that we have experience. You have an office that has conducted a mapping challenge before. They've created their own maps. They've administered both state and federal funds. And that's not true for every state in the union. There are a number of states that when this legislation passed, they actually had to go back to their own state legislatures and create a broadband office that didn't exist. So everybody had different starting points. Volume 1 is kind of preparing for that map challenge process, tuning up the number of locations, the places that are eligible for funding with the BEAD program. And as Matt mentioned, Volume 1 has been approved by NTIA, which does permit them to actually move forward with their challenge process.
So they don't have to wait till Volume 2 is ready?
Nope. Volume 2, it seems, is taking us a little bit more fine-tuning with each of the states individually. It's a lot more complex than Volume 1, so that's kind of an evolving timeline. But Volume 1 is approved here in Iowa. It allows the state to move forward with their challenge process. And then as soon as both volumes have been approved, that clicks another clock in motion, which is 365 days after both volumes have been approved. The state has to come back with a final proposal, and they'll say, we've gone through the selection process, here are the people who have applied for our subrecipients, and they'll submit that to us a year after both volumes have been approved. So to date, many states have had their Volume 1s approved. One state, the state of Louisiana, has seen its Volume 2 approved. So we're working with each states to kind of keep moving forward. We hope to do so in the coming weeks.
Okay, I'm going to go off script already. I told you this might happen. You're saying no, or you had something to follow?
Go ahead.
No, I was going to just unpack a little bit to help folks understand what's in Volume 1 versus Volume 2.
Okay.
So Volume 1 has been approved.
That's correct.
What does that mean for us?
Well, as Chris was saying, it means we can begin a map challenge process. So like with every other grant cycle that we've done, we start with a map. And so there are certain rules and procedures that govern how that map is developed, how it's issued, and then how it's also challenged by stakeholders across Iowa. And that includes providers, nonprofits, and so forth. Not only is there a sort of set of procedures there, but this is going to be different than other map challenges that you may have dealt with before. So one of the things that we're doing right now is preparing to implement that process. And that means creating a portal where map challenges can be received, creating the materials to let people know how the challenge process will work. And then I did bring just some notes just so I could make sure I got things right about the timelines. And we don't have a date to give you yet for when that challenge process will start, but our outreach and training will begin about 3 weeks before that date. And then from there, there'll be a 30-day challenge window, a 45-day rebuttal period, and then 45 days for adjudication. So we're kind of easing into late spring, summer, probably on some of those timelines. I do expect, that we're headed towards a date. I wish I could give you one today, but it's going to be nearer than farther away. How about that? That's about as specific as I can get. But that's the kind of timeline that we're setting forth. In the past, you've seen us work through certification forms, and there has been some opportunity for the public to interact with the map. My expectation is that the process you'll see going forward will be much more robust and automated, in part because challenge processes have just gotten more complex over time. And so we have to prepare for all of that so that we're ready for that challenge process. Now that we have NTIA's approval, that work is well underway.
Okay. So back on script a little bit. So when we were talking about the initial proposal, there was a number of things in the initial proposal that ICA and our task force agreed with how the program should be set forth. And one of the things, and we'll unpack them maybe one by one, but one of them was that the providers would be able to select their own locations and polygons, which was a proposal that the state made that I know that other states have either decided not to do it that way, or NTIA is even encouraging states to select the locations. We'll get to that in a second. One thing that we thought was good was that the state was proposing that there would be progress payments. That's during the implementation of the grant program. That's something that we found that was useful in prior NOFAs because of the immense amount of capital that needs to be put forward. And just kind of the general overall theme that the state said that they would work with providers to try to make this as good of a program as possible. We were very pleased about that. There were some things where we were suggesting potentially have the state and TIA take a look at some of the things that maybe we didn't think were the best at least from our perspective. And in terms of implementation, one of which was the requirement for offering a low-income program. Another one was some sort of a scoring mechanism where there would be more points for accepting less of a match. And we talked about that. The challenge process, which maybe you can get into a little more, and some other things like that. But we've gone through 8 NOFAs, and this one's different than the 8 NOFAs. Can you each of you give a little bit of an overview what in your mind, some of the differences are that providers who are going to be taking a look at this can just generally take a look at it and say, these are some differences I need to be aware of?
Well, I think, one of the balancing act factors that you did mention is the fact that this program does guarantee and is required by law to create service to each and every one of the unserved locations in the state. And those number several tens of thousands. Many of them are the high-hanging fruit that remains after previous programs. So things like whether it's a proposed geographic boundary or it's working with providers to really encourage their participation because they know who's in their backyard, who their customers are, what some of this challenging topography might look like. Those are a lot of the things that we've tried really hard to pay attention to. And I would say the things that are currently in front of NTIA for review are ones that groups like ICA advocated for. We have to make sure that we keep it in balance, that we are meeting the letter of the law, and that we can guarantee to the state, to taxpayers, and to residents here in the state that if they've been told in law they'll get service, that they can live up to that. So it's looking at each of these criteria and saying, what is the balancing act of attracting local providers to participate, while also making sure that residents in the state can count on internet service that is good and affordable and reliable in just a few years' time. Each state is approaching that differently, and a lot of those questions lay within Volume 2, which is being reviewed. We'll continue to work through each of the questions, but I would say, and it might be something to unpack in a different question, but throughout this process, and probably since last year when I met a lot of people here in the audience for the first time, a number of the suggestions that came from ICA and from at a national level NTCA have been incorporated. We've tried to listen. We've really wanted to make sure that where local providers have had feedback, that we hear it, we adjust program parameters accordingly, and we update the program and really tell you, yes, this is worth your time. Yes, it will make a lasting difference to the people who live in your backyard and in your community, and also hopefully you and your business.
So we've had these conversations well over a year.
Yes.
And we've had open lines of communication again, and I say thank you. You've spoken with our members, you've spoken with the folks at NTIA, and acted as a liaison, kind of as an advocate, trying to make the program work for Iowa. I say thanks for that.
That's the word that I would choose too. I don't, there's a partition. I don't actually get to review Iowa's proposal directly because I am one of the state's advocates within our process. I'm relaying the message, relaying suggestions that come from here on the ground in Iowa, and making sure that you've got a good advocate in this program.
And we appreciate that. And your office has been open too, Matt. Back to the earlier question, what are some of the big picture items that in your mind are significantly different, or things that these internet service providers would need to think about going forward?
Well, I think the biggest difference between this program and the others is what we've already talked about, which is the responsibility that we have to certify that all unserved locations are served at the end. So that was going to be the bumper sticker for this program. It is, we have to get to those most difficult to serve locations. And there's lots of things that happen kind of programmatically because of some of those requirements. And we can talk, if we have time, about some of the steps in NOFA 9, just to give you a flavor of how we've tried to help, kind of think about those things. The other thing I guess I would say that's different here are certainly some of the requirements that are going to be placed on providers that are new. And so our challenge from a state standpoint, having worked with all of you, is to figure out how we can make this program something that's successful and that achieves the goals. And so when we talk about things that haven't been done as much before, supply chain risk management plans, or climate resilience plans, or cybersecurity plans, those are net new for us programmatically. And maybe some of you have thought deeply about those things, but we're working with an assumption that we have to figure out how to bridge the gap. And that's really my charge from a state office perspective, is to figure out how to take some of these federal requirements and develop a program that you can work with. Because philosophically, we want to get everybody served. Well, how do we get people served? Well, broadband providers serve them. How do they serve them? We offer them grants. And so we have to create a program that you can work with. And that's just a balancing act. We've got all of these different requirements, these different interests and concerns, and the challenge will be to try to put all that together into a program that you work with. And I think we've made important progress, thanks to the comments we got from ICA, thanks to help from NTIA and all of Chris's good work, and our team's long experience running broadband programs here, to try to get closer to a program that will make a lot of sense for folks.
So, are you able to share some of the comments that other entities made, and are they similar to what we were talking about? Or are there some new things that we didn't even think of?
I would say that, and I don't want to diminish any of the comments that we got by being overly general, so that's not my intention. I don't want you to walk away from that. But a lot of the comments that we received were things that were just baseline requirements of the program that the commenters disagreed with. So there was a number of, here's the difficult thing, there were a number of comments that we received that we just, we struggled to think about how could we affect a meaningful response to that given the plain reading of the NOFA. So the real art of that is figure out how do we flow that up to NTIA and how do we bring it back down. So for example, number of concerns about the scoring criteria that was used, which I completely get. But
we gave those concerns too, knowing that you couldn't do anything about it.
Yeah, right, absolutely. And it turns out, and for those of you who spent any time with the program, there's primary and secondary criteria that's issued by NTIA that we have to adhere to. And so there are things like that. Well, I'm very thankful that there was a channel and a pathway for people to provide us with those comments. I don't know if we'll be able to be as responsive to some of them just because of the guidelines of the program.
And just so people know, because I actually had a question on that, but the scoring mechanism was 25% based on the level of the match, 25% based on affordability, 25% based on fair labor practice, 12.5% early completion date, and 12.5% on product attributes. Is that right?
I believe that's correct for Iowa's proposal. What I would say also, broadly speaking, at the kind of universal level across all of the states, 75%, the first 75% that you mentioned, they're part written by federal statute and nothing that NTIA itself can even change. And then the other 25% are criteria that have more flexibility, where we allow states to kind of come up with their own ideas or apply certain principles that move in the direction of things their audience might want also.
So again, we knew that was in the statute, but we commented anyway.
Sure, and
So.
I would, and that's valuable to us because it allows us to show back as we put together our proposals what we were hearing from stakeholders. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so there's a couple of really big questions, and let's dig into them a little bit more. But the first one is we've danced around it a little bit. The requirement that 100% of unserved locations in Iowa receive service. And that's the definition in this program is any locations that don't currently get 25 by 3. Underserved is defined as 100 by 20. How, as a state or even a nation, are we going to guarantee that whatever amount of money is available, that we're actually going to satisfy the mandate of hitting all of the locations?
So within those requirements, the ultimate requirement is reaching unserved locations. It kind of flows from there that if there are additional funds after, you would reach the underserved. And from there, if there's additional funding, many states would go to community anchor institutions or making sure that there is gig symmetrical service to places like schools, hospitals, certain core facilities within a community. Each state does have a different allocation. And I think given that Iowa, the strength of our experience is also the fact that we've gotten to a lot of locations already. And so the flip side of that is with our allocation, and I think the fact that we do have some challenging locations that have to receive service, we're going to probably spend most of our focus and our effort on reaching unserved locations. That's the one ultimate legal requirement. There is a likelihood, though, that underserved locations and other things will be caught up in the program and build out of certain networks. Some places it's going to make sense that you're hitting a cluster of locations because there's a cost-effective argument to do so. But I do want to say I think Iowa's going to spend probably most of our effort focusing on that unserved requirement. And the hope is that in the long term, that sets us in a strong direction where people are able to build out their business, they're able to reach new customers, and that we're also able to see economic vitality in the state as a result. People working remotely, new businesses that are able to put a storefront online, more kids getting class through the internet.
Preaching to the choir on all the benefits of broadband right here, aren't we?
It's the benefits are endless.
Right.
It's really an exciting and hopeful time. We just have to work through the challenges first, and then we'll get to see the rewards.
To every single person that is not hooked up to quality broadband, it's a life-changing event to get them hooked up. So
Absolutely.
We know that, and we want to get as many as hooked up as possible. Matt, did you have a angle on that?
I'll offer a sort of a simple perspective from my standpoint. Is so the question is, how do we fulfill this 100% mandate? The answer from my vantage point is we have to get providers to apply for the grant program. That's how we get broadband built, is through the work that providers across Iowa, like all of you, are going to do. And so my answer is going to kind of be a little mechanical, right? And that is, what are the things in the NOFA that we proposed? Now again, not necessarily the NOFA that we'll adopt, because we haven't gone through curing, but philosophically, how did we approach this as a starting point? And that was to try to, I guess, move to the later phases of the program some of the requirements that would mandate that providers put risk capital at stake before they're sure they're going to get money. So when you think about some of the requirements for building plans and doing those types of things, all of those activities we tried to build in later phases. Now again, don't know if that's where we'll end up, because we're not through curing, but the idea is to make it sort of falling off a log easy to get providers into this process. And that starts in NOFA 9, the NOFA 9 version we proposed, with a solicitation of interest phase. And what that solicitation of interest phase is doing, it's not an application, it's not a binding commitment. It's just trying to figure out who might be interested in participating in the program and where. Because what we're trying to do is figure out, where do we have gaps of interest? Gaps of interest or gaps of awareness across the state. Because the state's, it's like a jigsaw puzzle, and we need to make sure we have enough pieces to go in every jigsaw puzzle. And so starting there is a really important starting point. We're not proposing, in the version we sent to NTIA, project areas be imposed upon the provider community, but rather saying, where is everybody interested in building? And then when we find out there's some places where people aren't, we can take some remedial steps. And so there are other parts of that program that we've built as well to try to figure out, how can we recurse through this? You know, my view of this has been, for a long time, we've spent a lot of energy and effort building out our broadband office and having conversations with all of you. And a lot of good things get done when we do that. And so part of the design of the program is to have a kind of a negotiation stage in the middle. And so if we proceed with that design, what we'll do is sit down with you after you've submitted an application and say, here's what we've got, here's what's around you, here's what's missing. Let's have a conversation to see how we can work together to try to fill in some of the gaps. So a more organic and collaborative effort to try to work with you instead of sort of throwing paper legal forms back and forth. Let's just sit down and have a conversation and see what we can do together. And then ultimately, if any of the parts of it, don't work, and we end up with locations that aren't served, at the end, what we're proposing is we reserve the right to go back and open up any of those phases again if we need to fill in the gaps. So that's kind of the strategy we're taking from a mechanical standpoint.
Well, and I want to hand it to you again in your office, because I've had some feedback from some of our members lately that your office has been flexible with them in working out some of the nuances of NOFA 7 and 8 in terms of trying to make sure it makes sense from a business plan, and once all the facts are known, and the fact that we're already several months into the process.
Yep.
So thank you for that. I want to go backwards a half a step. We've talked a couple of times about the curing process and the fact that Volume 2 is in the curing process. Can you explain a little bit to folks what that means in terms of the fact that you're going back and forth about trying to come to an agreement on all of the different steps in Volume 2, is that correct?
Yeah, that's
and
right.
Are you able to share what any of those topics are?
Not yet. We're kind of going through that right now.
Okay.
But what I would say is it's very much, and I'll let Chris maybe take over here, but it's very much a conversation between the state and NTIA to figure out, how close are we to achieving some of those requirements? What do we need to tune or change? And so it's a little bit of a back and forth conversation on how we achieve some of those program goals.
I think that's a very fair assessment of it. We, as we evaluate each state's proposal, we owe it to them to hear the thought that they've put into it, the effort in communicating with stakeholders and the public, and also we owe it to, the public at large, to make sure that it's a fair and transparent process. So if one state submits a plan that has some unique features, as it proceeds to a review committee and then ultimately to the assistant secretary, we also have to make sure that giving the green light to one state doesn't necessarily move it or adjust it in a way that some other state may have wanted but didn't necessarily have time to incorporate into their proposal. You really have to set an even bar and make sure that as states are putting thought and creativity and really problem-solving effort into the way they've designed their plans, you're doing so in a way that's still fair to everybody, still meets the letter of the law, follows all of the programmatic notices, and has some uniformity. Flexible,
if you've
but
got 56 different plans to approve, it would be difficult to say, wow, Iowa's plan is so fantastic, we're going to allow this, this, and that to happen, but not in some other state. I mean, I can kind of see how that becomes difficult to administer.
Yeah, ultimately, we've asked each state to engage in a very thoughtful planning process. And we appreciate the thought being put into it, but we have to be a fair referee.
Okay, one of the other elephants in the room, at least for our members, is the requirement that there be an offering of a low-income plan. Mm-hmm. And that's something that has been at the top of the news lately in terms of whether or not providers would simply be able to point to offering ACP or Lifeline or whatever a program is out there. And we all know that ACP is being wound down right now. We have talked about the fact, and we've talked about it informally and in our comments, that a requirement for a provider who is a successful applicant to offer a specific low-income plan to a specific subset of new customers might create administrative problems in terms of how they're going to do their billing and offer a program for a segment of these population in this new town that might be eligible for a low-income plan, whereas other customers in the new build-out would not. And then what about the customers that are existing with that provider? So we've talked about all that, and we were struggling with how to come up with a proposal that would say we would like to give you a suggestion on what a good low-income program would be, but really it boiled down to the fact that our providers felt pretty strongly that margins are thin enough, that these locations are tough enough to serve, that they really can't afford to offer a segment of the population a discounted program for subscription service absent some sort of a ACP type program. And I'm sure others are nationwide have brought this to everyone's attention. So is there any insight that we can provide at this time? I assume that this is part of the curing process right now, or that some of the states are talking about that. But it's a big deal to a lot of our members because it's not just a fact of receiving CapEx to help build out broadband to new locations. But everybody in this room, if they're making a decision to build out, is looking at 10, 20, 30 years down the road to see if it's going to be profitable in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road. And if you have to basically take a major hit in what you can get on subscriber fees, then there's not enough other subscribers to make that up off of. So I know you've heard all of this, but it's a pretty big deal to our members who are contemplating whether to participate in BEAD. How are we going to shake this out? Or can we not say because we're in the curing process?
Well, we are, especially for the portion of review that has not, it hasn't gotten very far. We've got Louisiana is the one volume 2 that has passed through and been approved. And there are some lessons within Louisiana's proposal that I think would probably align in a few different ways with ICA's comments that you submitted. You have to consider maybe different ways that you can accommodate a provider's unique needs or ways to index over a period of time. And there are some lessons that can be seen within Louisiana's proposal. There will be other lessons that we see as other proposals are also approved. And yes, we're not through the review process, but the states are visiting with each other. They're trying to figure this out with you.
Yeah.
And I would say the goal has to be ensuring that where continuance of the ACP creates a real challenge. The inaction from Congress makes that more difficult. It creates a real kind of a tight moment here during our review of proposals and an understanding that
the timing is not ideal.
Well, it's, we have to forge ahead because this is what Congress both has required of NTIA to achieve at the same time that they have not necessarily reauthorized a program that helped. We'll do so. We're going to work with the states. We're going to work with the providers as best as we can. And if you read into what that low-cost requirement says, there are places where flexibility exists. There are places where we want for states to be creative and come up with an idea that they pitch to us, and we're going to work through that with them. We don't necessarily have a lot of examples right now that we can point to, but we hope that we will in the near future, and we do understand that to the provider community, that's a really important point and something that you're mindful of.
Thank you.
It's tough, and I will not sit up here and represent myself as having all the answers to this question. When I look back on some of the grant programs we run in the past, I think there are insights and lessons learned that can inform these discussions. One of them, for me, is how we coordinated on the Capital Projects Fund, NOFA, insofar as there were opportunities there for communities to provide perspectives on affordability. Those perspectives aren't necessarily anchored to an index, however, and so we run into some challenges and conflicts when we think about that. The requirements are there, and so I do think, I agree with Chris. I mean, the struggle every state is confronting is how exactly do you satisfy these requirements in the program while still providing some of that flexibility? And time will tell as we go through it. I do think there are strategies that could be deployed. The proposal that we submitted for public comment, there was essentially a waiver process that was set forth therein, which would kind of create an off-ramp for certain circumstances that could meet different thresholds. And there may be other solutions. And so those are we're gonna continue thinking about that as we move forward here and try to find, I think, the most equitable and reasonable approach that balances all of these interests. But like anything else, when you're balancing all these different interests, there are compromises that are made on one side or the other, and we just have to figure out what those are. So I think more clarity will certainly emerge in that over time, and then we'll go from there. But I want to be unequivocal. We have heard those comments. We have had those conversations. We are listening, and we're aware that there are concerns about some of those low-cost dollar thresholds.
Well, and we talked a little bit earlier, Chris, about how NTIA has heard the concerns through you, and we appreciate that. Do you want to just list a couple of things? Because there's been several different items that have kind of either had waivers or clarifications that have helped address some of these concerns.
I really appreciate the opportunity to provide that feedback, because over the last year, each of the states have been required to engage in town halls, in public comment periods, in a real stakeholder process where everybody's had an opportunity to say, this is a concern, or hey, this is a strength that we really want to see follow through. NTIA has issued, I believe, no fewer than 6 or 7 policy notices that really were fine-tuned right at the concerns that had been expressed from providers and from the public. And I want to make sure, similar to what Matt says, if we understand that participation is one of the keys to success, I don't want your participation or maybe wariness of participating to be rooted in a rumor or a concern of a year ago. Because a lot of these things have been addressed, and we hope in such a way that will encourage your participation now. To rattle off a few of them, the letter of credit concern that was issued about kind of your financial capability, alternates have been allowed. They include the allowance of use of performance bonds, the reduction of your financial obligation upon reaching a milestone, several different things that hopefully provide flexibility, especially for a small company. The Build America, Buy America waiver, a lot of clarification was released earlier this year, I believe in February, which tells providers specifically which pieces of equipment, what types of equipment will still have that requirement, and where flexibility has been granted, while still reaching 90% of all BEAD funds buying American goods and helping support the American economy. Historic preservation, where a specific site or a construction project has previously been surveyed and found not to contain historic properties, or where it's been disturbed already to the depth where probability of finding a historically valuable piece of property would occur. Any place where that's already been disturbed, the need to have a historic preservation section 106 process has been waived, and we are also putting the ball in the state's court, so that they can actually move forward with working with the state SHPO office without having to wait for NTIA to weigh in on each individual instance. We've tried to streamline that process. And finally, we've also added some directional alignment in the uniform guidance, the Code of Federal Regulations, so that it is more in line with what you may have seen in NOFA 7 and 8 in those Treasury programs. So things like reporting requirements, administrative and financial requirements that will hopefully support, be less onerous and support your interest, be a little bit easier to work with, have a shorter timeline of obligation for you as a provider to have to engage. They are more in line now with the recent Treasury programs than they were when the BEAD program was released a year and a half ago. So all of these improvements, one by one, we're hoping stack up and really provide feedback to providers and also smaller companies that there is a place for you. The Secretary of Commerce recently said, "We know that you're a key to success. We want you to participate. We're willing to work with you and want to work with you throughout the remainder of this program to guarantee that you're a part of it." In each and every way, we're trying to make sure that your comments are well received, whether they're here in the state or they're at the national level through NTCA.
Much appreciated. Now I see that clock says 6 seconds left. So I think we're at the end of our time. I still have all these questions left that we were going to talk about. Quick response or quick summary by both of you, I guess. Anything that we didn't get to that you wanted to make sure we touched on and advice to these folks as we move forward, because these conversations are going to continue on, and I appreciate the open lines of communication.
Yeah, I would just say keep in touch with us. We're here to help make sure that these grant programs, that questions are answered in a timely way. There will be, as you would ordinarily see with us, the town hall events, the question and answer sessions. And of course, when you call us, you will get a human being. And so do reach out, keep us posted. You know, we don't have crystal balls, so if you're seeing a problem or you have a question, please let us know so that we can get on that and get the answers that you need. That's the main thing I would just say is be a frequent and often outreach to us will help and let us know what we can be doing.
I would close by saying, we've spent a lot of time getting to this point, and we have, I think, some really rewarding times ahead of us. Your participation is something that we're very interested in. Given that I'm here on the ground in Iowa, that I'm bouncing around the state pretty often, I would certainly take you up on any opportunities for further feedback. This isn't a milestone that's been reached. We're still working through the process. And even though it's been a little bit quiet over the winter months as NTIA has been reviewing these proposals, I think that if you pay attention, there are going to be a lot of forms of public outreach, webinars, projected dates that are coming soon. And so where maybe some of these program updates that really will impact you and provide greater interest, maybe they're a little in the weeds, we'll make sure that Dave has a copy of them. We'll make sure that we're available to answer any questions and work through over the summer months what remains, what still needs to get fine-tuned. But we really appreciate your time today, and we do want to continue working with you and make sure that you participate if you're interested.
I appreciate it. Matt, we've worked together a long time.
Yep.
Christopher was, I forgot to mention, a longtime state legislator who was an expert on broadband issues that we'd worked with way back in the day. So couldn't be more pleased that you're in this position.
I spent years going to the legislator roundups at Western Iowa Telephone and up in Premier Communications up in Sioux Center. So really respect the work that you do.
So thank you, gentlemen. Please help me thank them for joining us today.
Thank you.